Mr Marshall. Dr Warnhuis, I suspect my questions will be for you. They pertain to the links between GISERA, CSIRO and gas companies. You will have seen this report out today by the Australia Institute Independent Pay Gas Industry Funded Research at the CSIRO. You're aware of that report, Dr Warnhuis?
Yes, Senator, thank you very much. I am actually aware of the report, yes. And I have actually written today to the Australia Institute regarding this report. Can I maybe just firstly state that CSIRO is actually very proud of almost 100 years of providing frank and fearless scientific advice for the benefit of Australia. Mm-hmm. To give you one example that I think you are very familiar with is climate change. We have provided information on climate change regardless of the political colour that is in power. We have also provided that advice regardless of whether we receive funding from fossil fuel companies or not. Now, with regards to the specific report, as you would be aware, it highlights the importance of the independence of yes. CSIRO's research in the space, which we believe is absolutely fundamental. And yes. in fact, we have taken considerable care to design a governance structure.
Well, I have some specific questions about the governance
yep.
structure, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm conscious that I don't have a lot of time.
Sure.
Perhaps I might go to those specific questions, and if there's anything you want to add at the end,
I will.
Please feel free. Thank you. So the National Research Management Committee, which is responsible for establishing the strategic priorities and the direction of GISERA, is comprised of 5 industry representatives, 3 CSIRO representatives, 1 government representative, and I understand the voting rights are then recalculated so that it's 50-50 between industry and the CSIRO, with the independent representative, so-called independent, even though it's a government person, holding a casting vote. In your view, is that an appropriate model?
So, Senator, the way the governance structure is set up, as I said before, is to strike a fine balance between obtaining input from the industry on the direction of the research, while obviously not giving industry control or undue influence over the research outcomes. So the governance structure has 2 main committees. One is the National Committee, mm-hmm. And it's actually not correct that it sets the direction. The National Committee is effectively just a procedural committee that ensures that the milestones are met and the funding is spent. The really important part that actually sets the direction of the work are the regional research advisory committees.
Yes.
And going to some of the specifics that are mentioned in the report actually claims that the Queensland Committee has 6 of its 11 members that are from the gas industry or CSIRO, with the other stakeholders forming a minority. Now, I'm afraid to say that it's actually factually incorrect in the report.
I have the composition of those bodies here, so thank you. I actually didn't have any.
Well, can I just finish my point, Senator?
Sure.
So the point that the report has made was that the other stakeholders form a minority. The actual makeup is 2 industry representatives out of the 10 voting members, 2 mm-hmm. CSIRO, 1 government, mm-hmm. and then 5 independent representatives, yes, which make up 50%.
Thank you. I can see that from the table that I have here. Why have gas industry executives on those research boards at all?
Yeah. As I said, it's a very good question that we spend a lot of time thinking about. Obviously, the gas industry has significant exposure and also some expertise in dealing with those questions. So we hope that through their 20% representation on the advisory committee, they can provide that expertise into the process. But we are also limiting their exposure to 20% on the research advisory committees, so that they obviously cannot control the committee. What we are also doing is, in the spirit of transparency, make all of the minutes of those committees publicly available, so you can download them anytime from the website. And I might also add that the article actually does not refer to any decision that the Research Advisory Committee has made that they draw into question.
Well, how do you deal with the public perception that in having industry funding and then industry representatives on the board that directs what research gets done, how do you deal with the perception that CSIRO's independence has been compromised?
Well, I guess the discussion that we are having is an example that we obviously need to very clearly articulate that. We hope that by explaining it, by being very transparent about it, we can explain what are the benefits and the drawbacks of that participation.
Well, you've gone through the benefits. What are the drawbacks?
Well, the drawbacks, as you have mentioned and as the article mentions, that there is a perception that there is undue influence. And that's what we are trying to navigate.
Yeah, okay. Just sticking with the model, I note that there's one government representative, which is also kind of strangely described as an independent representative, even though that representative is an employee of the Department of Industry, Innovation and Science, which has a strategic plan objective to promote the growth of competitive industries. In what way is that representative independent?
Well, actually, I would just refer to that representative, and that's certainly in the way that I have just described the Research Advisory Committee. I would just describe them as a government representative. I suspect anybody who is sitting on that committee will have a particular point of view that they're bringing to that committee, and what the point of the committee is to try to find a balance of those different views to determine what is the most relevant research that with the amount of funding that we have, GISERA should actually do.
Okay. I'm aware that the former CEO of Santos and also one-time chair of APPIA, Mr. David Knox, is now a member of the CSIRO board. And as I understand it, from December last year, he was also appointed the head of the CSIRO Energy Strategy Advisory Committee. Do you view that as appropriate, given the role that CSIRO plays in setting the direction of the research, that it's now a significant advisory body is headed up by a former gas exec? So
I might pass this question to my colleagues in a second, but I think just in general, yes, you're correct that Mr. Knox has been on the Energy Advisory Committee. Firstly, it's important to note that the committee has no directional decision-making power in CSIRO. It's purely advisory in its nature. And he's obviously just one representative of quite a number of representatives on that on our advisory.
He's the chair, though.
That's correct. Yes.
Are those minutes made available of that advisory board? Those advisory board meetings?
That is not our normal procedure, but I don't think there are particular secrets in those minutes.
Right. So again, if you've got a former gas head heading up the advisory committee and then you're not making the minutes public, that too would not engender confidence in the public that there's not a conflict of interest there.
Senator, perhaps I can help here. As a matter of principle, we always require any new board members to resign from advisory boards. So Michelle Allen, who was also on our Agriculture Advisory Board, resigned when she joined the board, as did Mr. Knox when he joined the board. In order to avoid exactly
I understand he's no longer heading up Santos while also heading up a CSIRO advisory committee, but he does have a history in the gas industry.
When he came on our board, he resigned from the CSIRO advisory board, the industry advisory board.
I see. So he's now on your head board, but he's not on the energy advisory.
Correct.
He's no longer the chair or a member at all.
Correct.
Okay, but he's now on an even bigger board that influences the whole direction of CSIRO. Okay,
He's
that
also
doesn't
on the
really allay
Prime
my
Minister's Science
concerns.
Council, Senator. So the other thing I'd point out, you may have noticed Dr. Wanos is quite passionate about this issue. All of our scientists, because they're trained in the scientific method, have a fundamental desire to present their science, a passion about it. And there's a sort of a principle of scientific truth. I think you'd agree that the last 6 months have shown that, it's difficult to direct scientists to do something they don't want to do necessarily. And I'd argue that our scientists
Well, you can always sack them.
Our scientists have an incredibly high degree of integrity, and they would always present their science regardless of who is funding it. And they're very, very passionate about that, Senator, and very committed.
I'm not disputing their passion, I agree. Can I move now, in the brief time that's left to me, to the phase 2 of the Fugitives study? So I'm not talking about the Surat Basin Fluxes report, phase 2, although I am interested in that, but there's no time, unfortunately, to go through that. I'm talking about the Environment Department funded CSIRO research into fugitives from CSG, which is meant to help assess the true climate impacts of the leaks that happen with coal seam gas and other unconventional gas. So when is the phase 2 report scheduled to be complete?
So we have completed the scientific work and have submitted the report to the Department of Environment and Energy.
Okay, when did you submit that?
I would have to take that on notice.
Okay, can you give me a rough indication?
I honestly don't know.
Okay,
But
thank you.
I will certainly provide that to you.
Thank you. So that's with the Minister now, as far as you know?
With the Department,
Minister?
that's correct, yes.
Okay. Have you discussed with the Department whether there'll be funding for phase 3 of that research?
Yes, as far as I'm aware of, we will be doing phase 3. In fact, phase 3 work has already started, which is some of the more longer-term measurement of background methane emissions.
Okay, so can you just outline for me specifically what the scope of phase 3 will cover and also how much funding is associated with it?
Again, I would have to take those questions on notice.
Okay, but you said it was about long-term background ambient emissions?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, how does that interact with the Surat Basin Flux report then, which I understand is comparing ambient methane with whether it's natural or incurred? Is there any interaction between those two studies?
What we would certainly try to do is maximise the synergies between those two pieces of work, because I guess in an environment where there's ultimately limited funding to achieve the maximum benefit, to the specifics of how those two pieces integrate, I'm very happy to take that on notice.
Thank you, because that Surat Basin report is 2/3 funded by industry. So I would be concerned if there was a close interaction with phase 3 of the supposedly independent government-funded study. So thank you. I'll await that with great interest. So phase 3's begun. Do you know what time frame you're operating to for the completion of phase 3?
Again, Senator, I would have to take that on notice.
Okay, and can you just confirm for me my understanding that given that stage 1 is now complete and public stage 2 has been submitted to the department, that so far the areas of CSG production that haven't been studied by CSIRO in relation to fugitives are water gathering and treatment infrastructure and decommissioned wells? Is that correct? And are there any other areas that also still haven't been studied?
I will take that on notice and I will give you an overview of what hasn't been covered yet.
Thank you. So do we yet have a full picture to be able to say with any confidence what the life cycle fugitives of CSG are?
So, Senator, we have an emerging picture, but I would certainly not call it a full picture yet.
Okay.
As we have seen from the initial pieces of work, and I guess we discussed in different fora the limitations of those.
Yes.
We have seen comparatively low emissions, but I would certainly say that we need to do more work to fully substantiate that.
Okay, so will phase 3 complete the picture, or will there be other areas that will still need to be looked at after phase 3 in order to get that full picture?
As you would appreciate in research, there's always more work that needs to be done, but certainly the work will be, I would say, a substantive step forwards in our understanding of fugitive methane emissions from coal seam gas.
Okay, so in relation, my final question, thank you. In relation to Australia's current emissions factors, which obviously I hope will be influenced by the findings of all of the phases of this study, does CSIRO normally have any input into the process of reviewing those emissions factors as a matter of course? And if so, has the government already asked you to start turning your mind to that, given, as you say, there seems to be quite a lot of doubt over the accuracy of our current emissions figures about fugitives from CSG?
So again, I would like to take, or I can take the detail of that question on notice. We don't have a formal role in this process,
Okay.
but I'm certainly aware that in other areas, for example, fugitive emissions from open-cut coal mining activities, CSIRO has played a critical role in determining those emissions factors and measurement methods.
So why the different approach to coal mines versus CSG?
It's a very different process in which methane emissions get released. So in an open-cut coal mine, you effectively dig a big hole
Yes.
and then expose the coal seam, and it basically vents into the
but
air.
why would CSIRO be involved with that and not with the calculation of CSG emissions factors?
Then I just gave this as an example where we have been involved.
Yes.
And so I'm aware that there have certainly been informal discussions held to the extent in which we are part of a formal process. I would have to take on notice.
If you could provide me as much detail about those discussions as you can, I'd be much
Would be
appreciated.
delighted.